Turn the lights low. Maybe grab a blanket. If you've got a candle, light it. Not for romance, just so the flicker feels right. Tonight, we're going somewhere cold, heavy, and strangely beautiful. We're going back to the Middle Ages, to a version of beautiful that most of us would find more terrifying than flattering. This isn't the romanticized medieval world of knights and ladies in flowing gowns. This is the real one, the one where beauty was a performance so punishing it bordered on religious theatre, where looking alive was suspicious, where the closer you came to resembling death, the more virtuous, the more desirable, the more holy you appeared. If that sounds extreme, good. It was. So let's begin where every medieval noblewoman began, in front of a warped bronze mirror, in a stone chamber that never quite warmed up, trying to become something the world would agree to call beautiful. Let's begin with number 1. The skin. Pale as piety. Your reflection stares back, candlelight dancing across it like nervous fireflies. The first thing you notice, the thing everyone notices, is colour. Any colour. A faint flush on the cheeks, a golden undertone from even one afternoon in a garden, the smallest suggestion of blood moving beneath the surface. All of it is wrong. In the 14th and 15th centuries, across much of Western Europe, especially England, France, the Low Countries, northern Italy, pale skin wasn't a beauty trend. It was a class marker, a moral signal, a theological flex. Tanned or ruddy skin meant you worked. You laboured in fields, carried water, walked dusty roads under the sun. Peasants were sun-browned, wind-chapped, alive in a very physical way. And to the aristocracy, that was grotesque. The ideal complexion belonged to someone who never needed to step outside, except to travel between castles in a covered litter. Someone whose life happened indoors, under tapestries and vaulted ceilings, lit only by candles and high, narrow windows. Someone preserved. Someone almost separate from the animal world. So the first task every morning was erasure. You begin with vinegar, sharp, cold, stinging, a linen cloth soaked in it, pressed and rubbed across your face until your eyes water. The acid helps strip away any lingering warmth, any natural oils, any trace of yesterday. Then came the whitening pastes. The most infamous was ceruse, or white lead, a thick, creamy mixture of white lead carbonate, vinegar, and sometimes crushed pearls or eggshells for texture. You applied it in layers, smoothing it with careful strokes, blending it down your neck, across your chest where the gown would reveal just enough skin to prove your dedication. It looked incredible in candlelight, almost translucent. Veins showed faintly blue beneath it, another desirable marker. Thin skin, delicate blood vessels visible, like rivers under ice. That was peak aristocratic fragility. But lead is lead. Within weeks, many women developed cracking, peeling, open sores. The paste would settle into those cracks, turning them grey-black. Hair fell out in patches. Teeth loosened. Headaches became constant. Tremors appeared. Over years, it accumulated in the body. Kidneys failing, miscarriages, neurological damage, death. And still they reapplied it every morning. Why? Because stopping made it worse. The contrast between the poisoned white mask and the inflamed, scarred real skin underneath was too stark. Once you started using ceruse, you were committed for life. The makeup didn't just cover damage, it created the damage it then had to hide. There were alternatives, slightly less lethal, but no less painful. A paste of ground chalk and egg whites, flour mixed with rose water, rice powder imported at great expense from the East, even plain wheat flour in poorer households. All of them dried the skin, clogged pores, invited infection. But they were cheaper than lead, and slightly less likely to kill you before age 30. We know this wasn't rare or fringe behavior. Portraits of noble women from the period, especially English and French court portraits, show faces that are almost shockingly white. Scholars still debate how much was artistic convention versus reality, but diaries, letters, and household account books record purchases of lead, vinegar, and whitening powders in startling quantities. Queen Elizabeth Woodville, wife of Edward IV, Margaret of Anjou, Isabella of Castile. Their surviving images all share that unearthly pallor. Whether they personally used ceruse, or whether painters simply painted them that way to signal virtue is still argued. But the ideal was consistent. The less human color you showed, the more elevated you appeared. So you sit there, face coated, waiting for it to dry. Your skin already feels tight, like it's shrinking inward. You breathe shallowly, partly because you're trying not to crack the mask, partly because you're already practicing for the tight lacing that comes later. You look in the mirror and see someone who doesn't sweat, doesn't flush, doesn't blush with shame or desire or anger. Someone purified, someone closer to marble than meat. And that, in this world, is the first step toward being beautiful. Number 2. Hair, gold, straw, and sacrifice. Next comes the hair. Not just the color, though color matters enormously, but the placement, the quantity, the framing of the face. Blonde was divine. Across medieval Europe, from the troubadour poetry of southern France to the Hanseatic courts of the north, golden hair was shorthand for purity, youth, and heavenly favor. Angels were blonde in manuscripts. The Virgin Mary was frequently depicted with pale gold or light brown hair flowing beneath her veil. Heroines in romances, Isolde, Guinevere in some versions, countless unnamed damsels, were golden-haired maidens. Dark hair, red hair, black hair, those carried heavier symbolism. Seductive, earthy, dangerous, sometimes associated with Jews, Saracens, or other outsiders in the medieval imagination. Brunettes were often cast as temptresses or tragic figures. Redheads as fiery or unlucky. If you were born dark-haired and wanted to rise in court circles, you had options. Bad options. One common recipe, recorded in 15th century Italian and French beauty books. Soak hair in a mixture of alum, quicklime, calcium oxide, and stale urine. Let it sit for hours. Rinse, sometimes with more urine. Sit in direct sunlight to lift the pigment. The smell was horrific. The damage was worse. Hair became brittle, straw-like, prone to break-in. Scalp burns were common. Some women lost large sections permanently. Another method used saffron, lemon juice, and goat or horse urine. Applied, wrapped, baked under a perforated straw hat. The goal was to create that luminous, almost metallic sheen you see in illuminated manuscripts. Even when it worked, the result often looked more like scorched wheat than spun gold. But in candlelight, at the right angle, it shimmered. And shimmer was currency. Then there was the hairline itself. This is where things get truly strange. The ideal medieval noblewoman had a very high forehead. Not just high, dramatically high. The hairline was pushed back sometimes 2 or 3 inches beyond its natural place. In many portraits, the forehead occupies almost half the face. Why? High, smooth, bare foreheads were read as signs of intelligence. A large brain needed space, nobility, no low, animal-like brow, spiritual calm, no distracting hair framing the face, imitation of the Virgin Mary, who was almost always painted with an expansive, serene forehead. To achieve it, women attacked their own hairlines. Tweezers were the basic tool. Hours spent in dim light, plucking hairs one by one. Painful, tedious, bloody if you went too deep. More aggressive methods existed. Rubbing the hairline with walnut oil or cat dung. Yes, really, recorded in some 14th century texts. Bandages soaked in vinegar or caustic pastes applied overnight. Shaving the front section entirely and letting it regrow. Or not. Eyebrows suffered the same fate. Most were removed completely or reduced to the thinnest possible line. A full, expressive brow was seen as vulgar, animalistic, distracting from the purity of the face. The face should be blank canvas, calm, untroubled, almost expressionless. So you sit, tweezers in hand, candle guttering, pulling hair after hair. Your eyes water, your scalp burns. But you keep going, because a low hairline or visible brows could mark you as unfashionable at best, morally suspect at worst. When you finish, you brush what remains back tightly, coil it, pin it, cover it with a sheer veil or heavy wimple. Only a faint golden halo is allowed to escape, just enough to catch the light, never enough to look wild. You look at yourself again. High, bare forehead. Brows barely there. Face framed like a saint in an altarpiece. You look serene. You look holy. You look like someone who has already begun to leave the body behind. Number 3. The body. Starvation as virtue. Now the face is set. The hair is disciplined. Time to address the rest of you. The medieval ideal wasn't just pale and high-browed. It was thin, not athletic thin, not modern fit thin, ethereal thin, translucent thin, one strong wind away from vanishing thin. Full cheeks were for peasants and wet nurses. Hollow cheeks were aristocratic. Visible cheekbones, sometimes so sharp they cast shadows, were admired. A slightly sunken look around the eyes suggested delicacy, sensitivity, spiritual refinement. There were no contour kits. There was hunger. Wealthy women practiced what we would now recognize as disordered eating, but it was socially rewarded. They ate little in public. At feasts, they might take a few bites, sip watered wine, push food around the plate with elegant fingers. Some chewed and discreetly spat into napkins so they could appear to participate without actually digesting. Fasting wasn't just religious, it was fashionable. Among certain circles, especially in 14th and 15th century France, England and the Italian city-states, prolonged fasting became a kind of competitive piety. Women would compete, quietly of course, over who could go longest on broth, herbs and air. Fainting at mass or during dances wasn't embarrassing. It was proof of refinement. The most extreme version of this was anorexia mirabilis, miraculous anorexia, a term modern scholars use for women who claim to live for years on almost nothing, usually the Eucharist alone. St. Catherine of Siena is the most famous example. She ate almost nothing, vomited when forced, and was eventually canonized. Her gaunt, radiant image became an icon. Noble women didn't always go that far, but many imitated the look. Lemon juice rubbed on cheeks to reduce plumpness, herbs that suppressed appetite, long periods of light meals, public displays of restraint. The body became a battleground for virtue. A rounded stomach suggested indulgence. A narrow waist and flat belly suggested control. Over appetite, over desire, over sin itself. And so you eat less and less. Your gowns hang looser. Your rings slide. You feel lightheaded in the morning, dizzy by evening. But when someone at court leans in and whispers, "You look so delicate tonight," you know you've won something. You've won the right to be seen as closer to God, closer to disappearing. Number 4. The Virgin Mary. The impossible blueprint. Every single thing you've done so far. The lead paint, the plucked hairline, the hollowed cheeks, the shallow breaths, points back to one figure. The Virgin Mary. She wasn't just a religious figure. She was the aesthetic template. In every church, every book of hours, every altarpiece, she appeared, pale, serene, high forehead, small mouth, downcast eyes, veiled hair, blue gown, golden halo or crown. Never angry, never laughing too loudly, never visibly pregnant in an earthy way. Always composed, always untouched. The church, the poets, the painters, the confessors, they all told women the same thing. This is what womanhood should look like. Pure, passive, maternal, yet virginal, suffering yet calm, beautiful, yet not seductive. Impossible. But you were expected to try. So you adjust your veil to mimic hers. You lower your eyes when a man speaks. You fold your hands in the same delicate way the painters used. You practice the half smile that suggests inner peace without inviting questions. You become a living icon, not because you want to, though sometimes you do want to feel holy, elevated, chosen, but because the alternative is worse. If you don't resemble her, you risk being read as something else. Eve, Jezebel, a peasant, a sinner, a woman who thinks too much, feels too much, wants too much. So you keep going. You keep erasing yourself, piece by piece, until what's left is something the world can agree is beautiful, and something it can control. Number 5. The mouth. Small, silent, suspicious. You've finished your face. The lid is dry. The forehead is vast and bare. The brows are ghosts. Now you turn your attention lower, to the mouth. In the medieval beauty hierarchy, the mouth was dangerous territory. It had to exist, obviously. You needed to eat, a little, speak, even less, and kiss, only when and how you were told. But it was never supposed to announce itself. The ideal was small, closed, discreet, lips thin to moderate, gently curved but never full or protruding. A large mouth, full lips, or prominent teeth were coded as vulgar, animalistic, gluttonous, sometimes even sexually aggressive. Poetry and conduct books were very clear. A woman with a wide mouth was loud, opinionated, uncontrolled. A small, pursed mouth suggested modesty, self-restraint, chastity. You were supposed to look like you barely needed to breathe, let alone speak or laugh. Smiling was allowed, but only the faintest possible version. A Mona Lisa half smile, a subtle upturn at the corners. Anything more, showing teeth, crinkling the eyes, letting joy crack the composure, was suspect. Open laughter was practically scandalous. It revealed too much. Teeth, tongue, the inside of you. It suggested appetite. It suggested life. So you practiced in the mirror. You tried different degrees of curve. Too much and you looked common. Too little and you looked sullen or ill. The sweet spot was serene detachment. A smile that said, I am content. I am above earthly passions, without ever saying, I am happy. Teeth themselves were another quiet nightmare. The ideal was small, white even, and invisible most of the time. Large teeth, crooked teeth, yellowed teeth. Any of these could ruin you socially. There were no orthodontists, no whitening strips. If your teeth showed when you spoke or, God forbid, laughed, people noticed. Some women, especially in wealthier households, rubbed their teeth with mixtures of sage, salt, vinegar, burnt rosemary, or powdered pumice. Others used ground brick dust or coral, abrasive enough to polish, but brutal enough to wear enamel away. Tooth decay was common, pain was constant, but appearance trumped function. Breath was its own war. You chewed fennel seeds, parsley, mint leaves, cloves. You rinsed with rosewater or wine infused with herbs. Bad breath wasn't just unpleasant, it was a moral failing. It suggested poor discipline, gluttony, or hidden sin. One 14th century French romance describes the perfect heroine's teeth as so small and fine they would scarce break the skin of a grape. That line was romantic to them. To anyone who's ever tried to eat bread with tiny ornamental teeth, it sounds like a sentence. So you sit, lips lightly tinted with crushed berries or alkanet root, just enough colour to suggest life without suggesting lust. You practice holding them closed. You remind yourself, no teeth, no wide smiles, no loud joy. Your mouth becomes another place where you disappear a little more. Number 6. Lacing and containment. The body as sculpture. Now the face is finished. The hair is hidden. The mouth is disciplined. Time to deal with the torso. Medieval women didn't have Victorian corsets. Not yet, but they had something close enough. Tightly laced kirtles, cote-hardies, and stiffened undergarments that reshaped the body into the approved silhouette. The goal was a long, narrow torso, small waist, gently sloping shoulders, modest bust and hips. Curves were allowed, softly, but only in the right places. The stomach had to be flat. The ribs had to disappear. The waist had to look like it could snap. Lacing was done from the sides or back, usually by a servant. You stood, arms raised or braced against a bedpost, while the cords were pulled tighter and tighter. Fabric dug into flesh. Ribs compressed. Breathing became shallow, high in the chest. You learned to take small sips of air, to move slowly, to never laugh too hard. Some kirtles were reinforced with reeds, whalebone strips, or even thin metal. These weren't full corsets yet, but they were moving in that direction. By the late 15th century, certain gowns were so rigid that women literally could not bend at the waist. You reclined instead of sitting. You waited for servants to pick up dropped items. You glided instead of walked. Layering added weight. Shift, kirtle, gown, surcoat, mantle, sometimes 10 to 15 pounds of wool, velvet, embroidery, fur trim, jewels. Every step was deliberate. Every movement was choreographed. And yet you were expected to appear effortless. At feasts you sat upright for hours. During processions you walked in slow, measured steps. If you fainted, and many did, it wasn't weakness. It was delicacy. It was proof that your body was too refined for the gross demands of the world. Some women started lacing young, as early as 12 or 13. Not brutally tight at first, but enough to train the body into submission. Over years, the ribs could deform, the organs could shift, breathing could become permanently shallow. Skeletal remains from noble burials sometimes show compressed rib cages and displaced livers. But the mirror showed a perfect hourglass. The court showed admiration. The confessor showed approval. You had become a living statue, beautiful, contained, controlled. Number 7. Sumptuary laws. when beauty was illegal. You couldn't just wear whatever you wanted. Medieval Europe was obsessed with hierarchy, and clothing was one of the loudest ways to announce your place in it. Sumptuary laws, regulations dictating who could wear what, existed in almost every major city and kingdom. In 14th century Florence, merchant-class women were banned from wearing gold or silver belts. In England, under Edward III, only knights' daughters and above could wear fur. In Venice, certain shades of purple, made from rare Tyrian dye, were reserved for nobility and clergy. Even the height of hennins, those tall, cone-shaped headdresses, was regulated in some towns. The logic was explicit. Don't dress above your station. Don't blur class lines. Don't let ambition show through fabric. Violations brought fines, public humiliation, confiscation of garments. In some cities, officials patrolled markets and churches looking for infractions. A woman caught wearing too much lace or forbidden colours could be stripped in the street, literally undressed by authorities. The laws targeted women especially. Moralists feared that lavish dress would make women vain, seductive, uncontrollable. Too much beauty was dangerous. It could tempt men, disrupt order, invite sin. So you learned to balance. You dressed beautifully, but within limits. You chose fabrics and trims that signaled status without crossing into forbidden territory. You walked the razor's edge between elegant and excessive. Every morning you stood in front of your wardrobe like a general planning a battle. Too much embroidery? Scandal? Too little? Poverty? Too bright a red? Lust? Too dull? Mourning or disgrace? Your clothes weren't just clothes. They were a legal performance. Number 8. Scent. Masking the animal. Now that the body is shaped, the face painted, the clothes chosen, you have to make sure you don't smell like a human being. Bathing was rare. Hot water was considered dangerous. It opened pores to disease, sin, or demonic influence. Full immersion was sometimes seen as immoral, especially in mixed-gender bathhouses, which the church eventually shut down or heavily regulated. Instead, you perfumed. Rosewater, lavender oil, crushed violets, spiced vinegar, dabbed on wrists, neck, behind ears. You stuffed sachets of mint, thyme, rosemary into undergarments. You wore pomanders, perforated metal balls filled with aromatic resins, hanging from belts or pinned inside gowns. You carried perfumed gloves, scented handkerchiefs, garlands around the neck. Linen shifts and veils were changed and laundered more often than the body itself. The goal was to create an illusion of freshness, without ever actually getting wet. Hair was another problem. Most women went weeks without washing it. They rubbed it with oils, rosemary, clove, bay, to mask the build-up. Lice were constant. Delousing combs and vinegar rinses were daily rituals. You stepped into the hall, smelling like a spring garden, while quietly stewing in sweat, old oils, and the faint musk of unwashed skin. No one could know. The scent was the final layer of the mask. If someone leaned close and said, "You smell like lilies," you had won. Number 9. Sickly chic. The beauty of being half gone. Everything you've done so far has one underlying message. The less alive you appear, the more beautiful you are. Pale to the point of translucence, hollowed cheeks, sunken eyes, bluish lips, a faint tremor in the hands, a tendency to faint at mass or during dances. These weren't flaws, they were features. In the later Middle Ages, especially 14th to 15th centuries, fragility became fetishized. A woman who looked like she might die at any moment was often described as radiant, ethereal, close to God. Suffering had redemptive value in Christian thought. Saints were beautiful in their affliction. Women who bore pain gracefully were spiritually elevated. So some women leaned into it. They drank only rose water for days before banquets to look bloodless. They fasted until they glowed. They cultivated a sorrowful expression. Eyes down, lips faintly parted. A soft sigh now and then. They swooned theatrically. In Burgundian courts especially, this became competitive. Ladies tried to outdo each other in displays of delicacy. A cough was romantic. A faint flush from fever was tragic beauty. Actual illness was often aestheticized rather than treated. The line between sick and stylish blurred completely. You too have learned to move slowly, to breathe shallowly, to let your hand tremble just a little when you reach for your goblet. You have learned that looking perishable makes people want to protect you and admire you. You have learned that the most beautiful thing a woman can be is almost gone. Number 10. Men had standards too. They just hid the pain better. It's easy to think this was only women's burden. It wasn't. Young noblemen faced their own impossible script. They were expected to be tall, but not awkward, lean but muscular, sharp-featured, clean-shaven, high-foreheaded. Yes, they plucked too. Smooth-skinned. Pimples were seen as signs of lust or weak character. Many used vinegar tonics and tweezers to keep their faces flawless. Their fashion was just as restrictive. Tight hose that outlined every line of leg and buttock. Exaggerated codpieces, sometimes so large they required laws to limit them. Doublets laced tight across the chest, heavy cloaks, pointed poulains. Long, ridiculous shoes that made walking a performance. They trained for war, but they also trained to look like they belonged in war. Graceful on horseback, deadly with a sword, poetic at court. They recited love poetry while wearing armor that weighed 50 pounds. They were expected to be brave but not brutish, devout but not dull, courteous but ready to kill. Appearance was moral capital for them too. A handsome knight was more trustworthy, more heroic. A poorly groomed one was suspect, effeminate, unmanly, untrustworthy. So while you laced yourself into near immobility, he laced himself into hose so tight he could barely sit. While you starved for delicacy, he starved for definition. While you painted your face, he oiled and plucked his. The difference? His suffering was coded as strength. Yours was coded as virtue. Both of you were performing. Both of you were trapped. Number 11. Beauty equals virtue equals wealth. The unspoken equation. By now, you've spent hours in front of that mirror. Your face is painted, your body is bound, your scent is manufactured, your posture is perfect. But none of it is really about aesthetics. It's about what your appearance proclaims. In the medieval mind, beauty wasn't decorative. It was evidence. Smooth, pale skin meant a soul untouched by labor or sin. A high forehead meant intelligence and spiritual clarity. A small mouth and downcast eyes meant modesty and self-control. A narrow waist and fragile frame meant discipline over appetite and desire. Theologians, philosophers, and poets all agreed. Outer beauty reflected inner worth. God gave beauty to the virtuous. A flawless face was divine favor made visible. Flaws, scars, moles, asymmetry, darkness of skin or hair were read as moral warnings. A crooked nose might mean deceit. A birthmark might mean a devil's kiss. Age or illness that marred the surface was often interpreted as corruption within. This wasn't fringe thinking. It was mainstream doctrine. Treatises like those of Thomas Aquinas and later moralists insisted that physical perfection mirrored spiritual perfection. Christine de Pizan, one of the rare female voices to push back, wrote passionately against it, arguing that women should be judged by deeds, not faces. She was right, and largely ignored. So beauty became a currency you couldn't earn through work or wit alone. You had to be born into the right conditions, or marry into them, and then maintain the illusion at all costs. And it was expensive. Lead paste, imported saffron, lapis lazuli blue dye, silk veils, fur trim, pearl powder. None of it was cheap. Peasant women couldn't afford mirrors, let alone whitening creams or perfumed oils. They couldn't afford the time to sit for hours plucking hairlines, or the food scarcity needed to stay hollow-cheeked. Their bodies were marked by labor, calluses, sun-darkened skin, strong arms, full figures from bearing children and hauling water. To the elite, those traits were horrifying. To us, they looked like health. But in that world, the farther your body was from labor, the closer it was to heaven. A thin, pale, high-browed woman with soft hands and a tiny waist wasn't just pretty. She was better. She was preserved. She was chosen. She was proof that her family had enough wealth to keep her useless in the practical sense. And that made her morally superior. You stand in your chamber, dressed and painted, and you know exactly what you're signaling. Not, I am beautiful, but I am wealthy. I am virtuous. I am untouchable. I am closer to God than you. And everyone who sees you reads the message the same way. Number 12. Aging when the mask cracks. You can't stay 20 forever. Medieval beauty was brutally tied to youth. Girls were married off as young as 12 or 13, not just for alliances, but because that was when they were considered most perfect. Fresh skin, bright eyes, smooth brow, full, but not too full cheeks. That narrow window was your value. After 20, the slide began. Wrinkles appeared near the eyes and mouth. Skin lost its tautness. Hair greyed or thinned. Cheeks hollowed naturally, instead of through fasting. The body softened in places the ideal demanded firmness. For men, this could be distinguished. Grey hair meant wisdom. Lines meant experience. For women, it was failure. Older women were pushed to the margins. They were no longer invited to the center of court life. Dances passed them by. Poems stopped being written about them. They became matronly, a polite word for invisible. If you tried to fight it, more makeup, tighter lacing, desperate hair dyes, you risked being mocked for vanity. If you let it go, you risked being pitied or feared. Older women who remained visible often fell into two categories: saints or scapegoats. Holy women, mystics, penitents, fasting nuns could be admired for their suffering. Their gaunt faces and trembling hands were reframed as divine. Their wrinkles were lines of devotion. Everyone else, dangerous. Widows especially were suspect. A woman without a husband was no longer under male control. If she dressed well, spoke boldly, or kept her looks too long, people whispered, vain, lustful, unnatural, possibly a witch. In some villages, older women with sharp tongues, unkempt hair, or facial marks were accused outright. Their appearance became evidence of malice. A hooked nose, a wart, wild grey hair. Suddenly, they were consorting with demons. Beauty's expiration date wasn't just social, it was existential. You reach your 30s, maybe your 40s if you're lucky. You look in the mirror and see lines you can't paint over. You cover your hair more completely. You lower your voice even further. You move slower, speak less, fade into the background. You become a ghost in your own life, and the world thanks you for it. Number 13. Rebellion. Women who broke or bent the rules. Most women conformed because survival demanded it, but not all. Some found ways to turn the very standards meant to contain them into weapons. Agnes Sorel, mistress to Charles VII of France, is one of the earliest documented examples of a woman who wielded beauty like political capital. She wasn't noble-born, but she rose to immense influence by being unapologetically magnetic. Low necklines, scandalous for the time, pearls, furs, glittering gowns. She dressed to be noticed. She used her access to the king to secure favours, promote allies, even help pull France out of a depressive wartime slump. Chroniclers complained she spent fortunes on clothes. Bishops grumbled, but she kept her power until the end. In Venice, the honest courtesans, educated, cultured, high-class companions, blurred beauty, wit, and influence into something almost modern. Veronica Franco wrote poetry, hosted intellectual salons, dressed in gold-threaded silk, and spoke with men as equals. They weren't prostitutes in the common sense. They were performers who understood that if society was going to judge them on appearance anyway, they might as well control the script. Other women used beauty as camouflage. A noblewoman with a reputation for grace could hide a sharp mind behind fluttering lashes. A widow known for quiet mourning could quietly manage estates and manipulate marriage alliances. Beauty became cover. A veil not of linen, but of expectation. Some rebelled quietly. They lit candles to the Virgin Mary in the morning and flirted in gardens by afternoon. They wore sheer veils that hinted at hairlines they weren't supposed to show. They layered meaning into every gesture. And a few, very few, simply refused. Christine de Pizan wrote books defending women's intellect and character over appearance. Hildegard of Bingen composed music, wrote scientific treatises, and refused to shrink into pious silence. They were exceptions. They were also proof that the system could be questioned. Most women didn't have that luxury, but even the ones who conformed sometimes found small ways to claim space. A perfectly timed smile, a subtle perfume, a glance that lasted 1 second too long. Beauty was a cage. Some women learned to rattle the bars. Number 14. The long shadow. We still inherit this. None of this ended with the Middle Ages. The ideals mutated, but they never disappeared. The Renaissance kept the pale skin and high foreheads, even adding arsenic-based cosmetics. The Victorians glorified the consumptive look. Pale, fragile, coughing delicately into lace handkerchiefs. The 20th century gave us heroin chic and size 0 runways. Today we have clean girl aesthetics. No makeup, filters that smooth every pore, and an entire industry selling effortless beauty that requires hours of effort. We still praise women most when they look like they barely exist. We still call thinness discipline. We still treat aging like failure. We still reward women who disappear into their appearance, who glow without trying, who stay youthful forever, who smile without showing too much. Scroll Instagram or TikTok and you'll see the same logic. No makeup tutorials that take 40 minutes. Natural glow products full of chemicals. Clean beauty that promises purity. Echoes of medieval virtue. Anti-aging creams that promise to erase time. Poses and filters that make everyone look like medieval icons. High foreheads, small waists, serene half smiles. The language changed. We don't call it piety anymore. We call it confidence, self-care, empowerment. But the pressure is the same. Be beautiful, but don't look like you're trying. Be desirable, but not too much. Be perfect, but pretend it's effortless. And when we fall short, when we age, gain weight, show fatigue, laugh too loudly, take up space, we still feel the old judgment. We're still being measured against a template drawn in the 14th century. Number 15. Closing. You are allowed to be here. So here we are. You've spent this whole script becoming her. The pale, high-browed, small-mouthed, tightly laced, perfumed, fasting, silent, holy woman in the mirror. You've felt the sting of vinegar, the burn of lead, the ache of laces, the hunger that never quite goes away. the weight of layers and expectations. You've seen how every choice was a trap, how beauty was never just beauty. It was proof, currency, control. And now the candles are low. The chamber is quiet. The mirror is empty. Take the veil off. Let your hair down. Breathe deeply, really deeply. For the first time in hours, you don't have to be her anymore. You never did. You are allowed to be warm, flushed, loud, wrinkled, hungry, angry, joyful, alive. You are allowed to take up space, not as a symbol, not as a saint, not as a moral lesson, but as a person. The medieval world tried to make you disappear into perfection. You're still here. That's the real rebellion. Thanks for sitting with me through this long, dark, strange journey. If any part of it made you angry, or sad, or grateful, or just thoughtful, drop it in the comments. What shocked you most? What felt uncomfortably familiar? Like and subscribe if you want more dives into the past that make the present feel a little lighter. Turn off the candle when you're ready. Sleep well. And tomorrow, when you look in the mirror, be kind to the living woman looking back. You've earned it.